Muy bien. A nombre de ZsONAMACO y de la sección de nuevas propuestas, les agradecemos por estar acá. Vamos a empezar con nuestra primera mesa del día de hoy, que se llama Proximidad, ¿hacia qué? O Proximity to What. Tenemos el día de hoy a nuestra moderadora, Dana Kopel, y a 3 artistas, Gordon Hall, Pia Camil y Jen Rosenbilt. Les pido un aplauso para darles la bienvenida.
I want to begin by asking, can objects be bodies too? And if so, how do they desire differently? I'm thinking about the forms created by Gordon Hall, Pia Camil, and Jen Rosenbilt that either echo or suggest a relationship to the human body. A handle, a tunic, a pile of fuchsia felt. Each of these artists, I think, proposes an intimacy between human and thing, a subtle closeness that arises when, for instance, a hand caresses a small sculpture, or a body moves against a wall, or through a space in a somehow more deliberate way. There's a sense of equality that emerges when the boundaries between body and object start to dissipate, as they do in these artist practices. When the categories body and object are themselves brought closer together, their conventional definitions are called into question. Objects become bodies, as in Gordon Hall's recent performance, And Per Se And, in which the artist meticulously rearranged small, handmade and handheld sculptures into formal compositions that doubled as object sentences. Or in Stand And, an hour-long performance by Hall, along with several other performers, and a series of larger sculptural forms, which were moved around, repositioned, leaned on, and leaned against the pale green, sunlit wall of a handball court in Chelsea, New York. As in much of Hall's work, the performance drew out a physical closeness and a sense of agency in the once still objects. Touching, placing, holding, handling, there's an intimacy to the movements, even the smallest gestures, that comprise Hall's performances as well as Jen Rosenblit's dance works. For Rosenbilt, proximity extends across time and physical distance and exists despite absence, as in the recent performance Clap Hands, which developed through several iterations, incorporating a changing group of collaborators and sculptural props. Bodies become sculptural, sculptures appear bodily, and the distinction between an individual body and the social and physical world that supports it is rendered unclear, in favor of an intimate interdependency. For both Hall and Rosenbilt, the concern with the relationship between bodies and things, how they're brought together, how they come apart, is, I think, related to a project of queer practice in which the signification of bodies as normatively gendered and the outlines of desire are called into question. Particular attention to objects and bodies, how they move and are moved, how they differ or resemble each other, can produce alternative forms of embodiment, desire, and knowing. For these artists, attention itself is a form of proximity, even of intimacy. Pia Camil's work extends this proximity into the social field, exploring ways of relating differently. Her objects allow for interaction among strangers, whether through the organized exchanges of things between herself and museum goers in her current exhibition at the New Museum, or in last year's Wearing Watching at Frieze, in which the artist distributed colorful patterned textiles, which could be worn as robes, but also utilized as picnic blankets, sheets, and so on, to visitors at the fair. The work posits art as a site for alternative modes of exchange, even at an art fair, in which exchanges seem to take place primarily through precise social and economic formats. The robes, moreover, transform the body into a thing, vibrant yet departicularized. Camil focuses on how bodies move through space, and especially through a space full of other bodies and the object signifiers that distinguish them from each other. Yet her work doesn't result in an erasure of difference, but rather a means through which one might recognize oneself in other bodies, other objects, a proximity that is potentially transformative.
Hi, so I'm going to present 3 different projects that engage with proximity and ideas of exchange and public participation. The first project I want to start with is a show I did a couple years ago called Entre Cortinas, Abre, Jala, Corre. Translated in English is Between Curtains, Open, Draw, Come. And this show, which is, you're seeing the images right now, is based on a script that you're seeing right now on the screen, which I wrote with in collaboration with a poet and writer, Gabriela Jauregui. And the script basically describes a house or a domestic space that's habitado, lived in, inhabited by a woman that we never see. The characters of the book are the vases that you see now on the screen. And so the idea is that you would go to the show, get the book, and it served a little bit like a floor plan, and you would walk around, and there's this narrative described around the objects and the way you use the space. So you were welcome to, all the curtains were hung in a circular rail, so you could move the curtains around, and a lot of the script has to do with this very repetitive sort of movements that have to do with, ideas of, female sort of behavior, a little bit like a housewife being trapped in a space, and kind of the everyday mundane things she does in the space, opening and shutting curtains, opening and shutting windows. And the curtains, it's important to say that it's a body of work that I've been expanding on. The design is based on abandoned billboards that you see across the city. So what I do is I do almost one-to-one replicas of the billboards in textile, and each piece is hand-dyed and stitched together in an almost artisanal way, as a sort of a way to subvert mass-produced objects. And so it's a way, for me, I describe it as a way to slow down mass culture in this very artisanal process. And the vases and the shapes come out of some of the fragments and images you see in the curtains themselves. So in a way, I built this very sort of cryptic scenario, and it's almost like a stage set where nothing really takes place. The idea is that if you visited the show more than once, that the pieces would be moved around in the space as well as the curtain. So the show is never fixed, and there is this sensation of that things are happening, but you really don't see the person. I'll show you quickly part of the book. Well, the last day of the show, there was a performance. So the author of the script, who is right now on the screen, is Gabriela Jauregui. She read her script, and she was wearing a tunic, which is the typical type of clothes women wear around the house, and it was made out of all the remnants from the curtains. So the 6 blue curtains that you saw previously, they got put into one big telón, I don't know how you say that, big curtain, like backdrop. And she read the script, and then me and another friend of mine who was also involved in the project, we sort of did the movements, or carried out the actions that are described in the script. This is the first time that even though I have dealt with performance and most of my work deals with the performative, whether there's a body in it or not, it's the first time that the objects themselves, like the vases, had a life of their own. And it was important for me to sort of attribute the performative to things like, vases and curtains, and not just in this minimal art type of theory that it's implied in the object, but that the actual objects have a life of their own. And I like the idea that I could engage with the public by making a work or a show that wasn't static, that it had it had movement implied in it, or the sense, as you could see you could read in the script, the sense that there's actually a female character inhabiting the works and living with them. So this is the script. So the script has it's a way to go into this cryptic kind of language that you see in the curtains, the vases, to describe it a little bit as through an anthropological type of perspective, to understand the significance of billboards and the byproducts of mass culture, the female role within that culture, and other type of reflections that I was having with the work while I was doing it. And of course, there's a very strong kind of sexual sort of implication. So there it is. This is one important show because it sort of catapulted different shows that sort of had me thinking about proximity. The next one is the Freeze project. These ponchos are based, the project was based on a very famous piece by a Brazilian artist, Elio Itisica, called Parangoles, where he would have people wear his paintings. He called them the habitable paintings, as a way to make the spectator aware of his own role and how he could inhabit art and become both things at the same time, the art and the spectator. And so I thought that was a nice way to comment on sort of the behavior of fairs and this, the way that the social dynamics that happen in fairs. So I made 800 ponchos. They were all assembled by hand, and they were hung in these rails, kind of like a retail sale. And there were 2 slots during the day that were given out, where we would give out the ponchos. So it worked a lot like a store, like people would line up and then they would pass and then they would pick the poncho that they liked the most, and then they would just take it home with them. So it somehow generated a lot of buzz because it was a very simple thing that, considering the circumstances of the fair, had a huge impact on the dynamics. So basically, in a context where nothing is given out for free, you give something for free, and it's that simple. Like, people were really going crazy for them. I think it exposed. I always describe this project a little bit as a little bit of a perverse type of piece, because I kind of wanted to expose all the good and all the bad that happens in fairs. And so we got everything from very, very generous people that were very happy with the project, to people that were, bribing the staff members to get one and trying to cut across the line. And so I think it did expose, my idea was to try to understand how things like fairs, which now totally have an effect on artists' agendas, and we kind of produce around the clock, around the art agenda, art fair agenda. You know, what type of real significant relationships can be met in this type of environment, you know, and I think it wasn't really up to me, but leave it up to the public and see how they, just by sort of signaling each person with a poncho, they become little targets or focus points that you could, you know, they could sort of just by themselves sort of be characters of that larger context, how they behaved, or how desire played a huge part in this piece, because it's a, you know, I think art fairs are sort of driven by desire, and this was a way to sort of highlight that, you know, how the incredible demand over the poncho became a very sort of tactile way of dealing with that. So the next project was it's a very recent project that I did at the new museum lobby gallery, and it got, the opening was last week. And this project is based on display structures that, of low commerce. This particular piece is inspired in markets of Mexico City, specifically La Merced, which was right next to the studio I was working in at the time. When you see it from one viewpoint, as you are right now, there's this sort of overlapping that happens from one grid to the next, and I always have some art reference in my work, and this particular reference was Agnes Martin's grid drawings, and that really is just something that's important for me when I make the work. But then the important element of the piece are the objects that are hanging from the grids, and these objects were donated by the public. So what I did is I did an edition of 100 sweatshirts that were certificates. So the sweatshirt itself said exchange certificate for the donation of, and in this case it would be frying pan or egg frying pan. And so I basically did a contract with each person by giving out a sweatshirt in exchange of an object. And then the objects got displayed on the grids, and every now and then, every 2 weeks, so that's the sweatshirt, every 2 weeks there's an exchange day in the museum, and it works a little bit like a shop. So if you like the sweatshirt, you go up to the staff member and you say, I'd like that sweatshirt, and I would exchange it for the coat, and so you hang your coat there in exchange for the sweatshirt. And in that way, you generate an economy without, with no money, much like old primitive economies. That's the name of the show, is based on Native American ceremonies of potluck, which were a little bit like that. My idea is, it was my interest for doing a project like this is to try to reflect a little bit of the potency of the object itself, and that despite the lack of monetary value, that the object itself can actually have other things embedded on it. So I particularly asked people to, I solicited objects that had poignancy and power and personal history, and things that back in the day to the Native Americans, it wasn't only about a monetary relationship, but it had to do with spiritual, political, social exchanges that were happening through these exchanges. So they kind of got displayed in this way. things like the hands and the breasts, the silicone breasts that you see behind, these are all things that I started including because they in a way they do reference things or body displays, and they're all part of the same structure that I was interested in. These structures that we are familiar and familiarized with mass culture or that type of commerce. I don't know how we're doing with time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you set your phone for like 7 minutes?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Sometimes these talks at fairs kind of devolve into talking about how it's sad to have a talk at a fair. And I don't want to do that, but it is. I know it's hard to listen and everybody's exhausted, and it's sort of like a fitting room. But on the theme of proximity, there's amazing people next to me and in this audience, and I'm very thankful to be here. So historically, I've made sculptures that sit on the floor, and I've thought a lot about proximity to objects in terms of the scale of one's entire body. So I've thought a lot about stuff you sit on, and stuff you walk up towards, and stuff you walk around, and have come up with some ways of articulating what these things are, like saying things like, they don't represent movement, but they conjure movement. Like, they don't show bodies, but maybe they produce bodies in different kinds of ways. Like wondering about how we engage with sculptures that are also furnitures that seem to have uses, but also are useless. So that's just a bit of a background, because the project I want to talk to you about now, where is it? Here. Awesome. And if we just go, here, wait, can we go like there? Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I don't know how to drive this thing. There? No, how can I see? Sorry. It's just not where I wanted to. There. Okay. Yeah, that one. So this is a very new project that I just did in January at a space in Philadelphia in the US called the Temple Contemporary. So the piece consists of this table, which I designed. It is, it's sort of an I and an H and a table. And then on the table was this series of handheld sculptures. So this was a bit of a foray into thinking about the proximity we have with objects on the scale of our hands and the kinds of different intimacies we have with small things. So I want to show you some of these images, and then the way the work functioned was a way my work often functions, which is that it essentially has two sort of complete states. So one complete state of this piece was as a sculpture, so the table with all the objects that you could come see on any day the museum was open. And then there was a performance that was in the form of a lecture that paired text with the different objects. So the way it was organized was the camera was looking down at the tabletop, at the desktop, essentially, and then making it vertical, quite similar to the way computer desktops are horizontal, metaphorically horizontal spaces made vertical, right? And then it was live feeding to the projection. So what I was doing with my hands, moving the sculptures around and using them while giving this lecture, was visible both, from the side, in the context of my whole body, but then also on the screen behind me. Will you?
I can click it. Do you want me to click it on top?
Yeah, just like scroll. So I'm going to read to you just a selection of this lecture. So it's actually going to be out of order. And I've picked the passages that I feel related the most to some of the things we're here talking about.
I just go?
Yeah, sure. And some of these are quotes, direct quotes or altered quotes from various different sources that I can tell you, and some of them are my own voice. The that holds together the parts of the sentence is cumulative. When you combine a noun and a verb into a sentence is the parts of which only after the sentence has been spoken. You connect the details accretively as they, one after the other, a succession of views that oozes at the edge of words. I weigh each in my hand, each of the four sides. They are of the same tuft. Seeing myself in photos, my hand up in a claw, my talon, resting, grasping, putting my phone in there just to give it something to hold on to. Always gripping, holding on, holding on. Another interpretation is that the ball symbolizes a polished river stone being held firmly by a crane who stands diligently over her nest. Resting on one leg, with the stone held in midair by the other, the mother crane watches over her young and would quickly awaken if she were to fall asleep and drop the stone. Hi, Willie. Can we talk more about thumbing? Yes. What are you thinking about? What it means. I'm making a show of handheld sculpture, so I'm thinking about my hands and the things they hold and utilize a lot. Yeah. That word for me came out of thinking about speed reading, which describes specific hand motions over the surface of a text to maximize reading speed. So, thinking about a touch that skims a body, the casualness with we use our hands for labor, but the sensitivity of that hand touch too. So yeah, now thinking what it entails to make something scaled to the cup of our hand. Something about control and mastery, but also tenderness. Not that those are necessarily opposed. I like the vagueness of the word feeling, touch, and affect. I want to see your small sculptures. Like newly articulate, highly sentient beings, they begin to transform, becoming first one thing and then another. The block is the reduced formal equivalent of radio, flashlight, toaster, fruit, rock, tool. Note. If you are nervous speaking for a crowd, don't hold a piece of paper up where they can see it, because that's how your trembling becomes visible, vibrating the piece of paper, tiny shakes. The same goes for a glass of water in your hand, ripples. I myself have had no liking for violence and have always enjoyed the pleasures of needlework and gardening. I am fond of paintings, furniture, tapestry, houses and flowers, and even vegetables and fruit trees. I like a view, but I like to sit with my back turned to it. Basically, what we are talking about is body language, which can be very subtle, very subversive, very secret, so subtle that you don't even see it. That's why I have to instruct the performers to move extremely slowly. You could call it behavioral minimalism. In the behavior tableau, what I want people to become aware of is the emotional nature of the number of inches between them. So just to go backwards, that was from some writings by Scott Burton. The one about gardening was Gertrude Stein from the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. The newly articulate, highly sentient beings, that's John McCracken. And then that conversation was a text interaction with my friend Willie Smart, who's an artist who lives in Chicago, and then all the other stuff was me speaking. And I'm going to stop there.
Does this work? Yeah. Hi, I'm Jen Rosenbilt. So I make performances, and in performance spaces, I feel like people kind of think I'm kind of more in the visual art sphere, or I care more about things that visual artists care about. And then when I'm at these spaces, I kind of feel like I want to claim dance as what I do, because I don't know, there's something nice about people who are concerned with and honor the body as the, yeah, could you fix those up for me? So anyway, I've been increasingly concerned about and interested in problems. I find that the more problematic the space or the scenario, the more, right there, yeah. The more problematic the space or the feelings or the scenario, the more, I guess, curiosity I have about what can occur in terms of intimacy. So one major thing about performance with me is I kind of need you, and that's a problem for me. I don't want to need you. I kind of want to make something that is just about me. Kind of want to be alone and not have to deal with you, but I do need you. So in needing you, I guess I start to think a little bit more about myself. And I kind of offer myself proposals, like what would I do for you? But you could be anything. You could be a concept. You could be an object. You could be this pile of felt. You could be me. But I do take some time to develop a proposal of really a simple question of what would I do or what would it take? So I've been working with this fuchsia felt. I've worked with a lot of different materials inside of performance, kind of sometimes costuming, sometimes more sculptural. This time I'm really working with material as materiality. So it's just a stack of felt. And this isn't the performance, I'm just talking to you. So this isn't what the performance looks like, but this is the research that I've been engaged in with performers over the course of about 1.5 years. One of the major questions I have around intimacy is the problem of coming together, the problem and the sets of problems that emerge as groups of people locate togetherness and kind of the assumed spaces that we can hover inside, like because there's a panel, we could come together and listen to someone talk about their work. I like that proposal a lot, but I don't believe it right away. I don't believe that we're all in a space of togetherness. Or I could believe it, but I kind of think that we all have different ideas of what that is, or different agendas around togetherness. In terms of togetherness, I always want to get closer to people, but people don't really always want to get closer to me. But I guess being a performer, I can kind of take that risk and assume it because I'm the performer. So I've been using this material in a super simple way. It was purchased because I hate the color. I think it's really poppy and a bit too vibrant. It's a color that's used a lot now. I mean, I guess it could be associated with femininity to a certain extent, but I think more what this color is associated with is a sort of flamboyancy, a sort of representation of queerness that I want to be into, but I'm not. So I purchased this material in a really clear way to see if I could continue working with it for a long time and sit inside of the problem I have with it. And what else could it become? Or actually, more interesting for me, like what else could I become? How could I start to shift it and engage with it rather than change it? Because I could alter it, I could dye it, but I guess that's part of the problem. From the beginning, I could have just gotten something else, you know, like I didn't need to get this. And my mom keeps asking me why I choose such complicated things, like why couldn't I just fall in love with somebody who's right near me? You can go by. You can go by. Why do I have to fall in love with people who are far away? Why do I have to take jobs that are so far away? Like, something about proximity is that we value closeness and we value presence in this super fundamental, like super clear, highly legible way. And I happen to be a little bit more interested in illegibility. I don't know if that's abstraction, but that word kind of makes sense for people, especially in art crowds. So back to the problem. So I was thinking, I need you in order to get at the things that I think are important to talk about. But because my form is performance, I don't, like, you're not going to be there every time I'm practicing or when I'm making the thing. Or even like when I want you to be there, you're kind of not there. So So part of the problem is like, how do I start thinking about you? And how do I start including you in the research? And then once I figure out ways to include you, how do I not isolate you based on my intense sense of proximity to you? Like, how do I, kind of what's happening now, how do I not isolate you from the whole just to let you know that I'm interested in you? I don't have the answer to that. I think that's a big problem in terms of intimacy. But I don't think it's my job to answer all the questions. I think I'm just supposed to come up with like an interesting proposal and then make some good performance and then hopefully make a little bit of money at it. But so this material started out as a massive sheet. I was using it in a more theatrical way. I covered the floor with this felt material, and I thought, okay, maybe I could make a performance in relationship to a kind of theatricality and call it soft goods. And we would all be wearing pink socks. And anytime you go on the felt, someone would say shoes off when on the felt. It would be a really clear concept and people would like it. It would be a good picture that I could send to publicists. It was a pretty good idea. But, I mean, because I'm complicated, I started cutting up the felt because I was angry. And I had a studio at the time, which was really great. You don't want that piece. Because as a performer, I don't really always have an art studio like some visual artists have. But I did. I thought it was necessary. But since I had that space, I then started using it, and I cut up all this material. I guess like how you might start cutting your hair off, like if something traumatic happened, maybe you're like, okay, I'm gonna get a new haircut, and the cutting, the action of rage will somehow release some beautiful thing or something like this. It didn't do that. It just messed up my project because then I didn't have a big sheet of felt anymore and I hadn't taken the picture yet. So I was left with all these pieces and I started doing things with the pieces. I started fabricating a table and a chair. And I thought that would be super nice to make things that were already things because you would know what they were. Okay, that's a pink felted table, and that's a pink felted chair. And something about that felt exciting to me, like finally people would understand what I'm doing if I made something that was already legible. So I quickly moved away from that idea, though, clearly. Can you hand me this? That's so fine. So I scrapped all of those ideas. Can you try and fit it inside of my embrace? Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Lost the glasses.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I am going to need that, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, so dealing with people in proximity and needing other people in terms of getting an idea across is pretty messy. Like, it's not, and this might offend someone in the room, it's not an object. I'm sure objects can be messy. But, I mean, I think how they sit in the world is that the nature of an object is not messy. But bodies are messy, and they do inappropriate things, and they break the law, and they tend to not be legible. this for me? You come close, yeah. Gracias. So, this work that I'm researching is called Clap Hands. It's a series of proposals dealing with the problems of coming together and the failure inside of that, and how we likely never achieve a true coming together of things or bodies, but somehow in some weird, fucked up dystopia, something else could emerge, like something more important than togetherness. Thank you. Yeah, like someone might stand up, someone might shift their position, someone might take on some kind of labor that they hadn't been previously asked to do. But it's kind of what the work calls for and what needs to be done in order to attain or obtain or locate whatever the thing is. And even when we find the thing, even if it makes some kind of sense, what's more important is the labor and the sitting with the things. Oh, sorry. And the unknowing. Thank you. Maybe that unknown space could be something more interesting than being right next to somebody. And really, something about coming together could be more about autonomy or staying apart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Guess we have a few minutes, so I'll open up questions to the audience if anybody has a question.
Tenemos un par de minutos para unas preguntas. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta?
Okay, well, maybe I can ask a question then. I'm very interested in, Jen, what you just brought up, the space of illegibility and of unknowing. And I think that comes up sort of in all of your practices in different ways, sort of like ways you like resist representation or like resist like a still and solidified form or exhibition. So maybe if you want to talk more about that, any of you.
Yeah, I think specifically working in live performance with bodies, but also more specifically my body, that inside of the traditional dance performance realm, my body sits a little bit off-center to maybe a status quo or what we think of in really old, I mean, I don't think anymore, but it always comes up. I think we're starting to have pretty expanded ideas of what bodies are and what performance can be in general. So I don't want to dig that narrative too deeply, but I do think there's a interest and a curiosity in not fitting anywhere that I think is explicitly queer, but when I say that, I don't mean as related to gay people. I think it's a queerness that hovers around a lot of people, hovers around my mom, it hovers around, I think, people's grandmas, cousins. It's a not fitting, things tend not to fit, and just like things tend to fail, and the problem is we've set up a model of success that we're all constantly in proximity to, whether we're rebelling against it or trying to set up new models or not. So something about the illegible for me is, yeah, less of a rebellion of legibility and more just kind of what's happening. I feel like it's paying attention to and a listening to what's happening, and that forms are malleable and things decay. And with those two belief systems, hovering around and in between different forms and concepts and ideas, and resisting, what was the word you used? Representation. Yeah, I mean, I think representation is gender, is everything. It just is a series of perceptions, and so representation, I don't even quite know what that is. I don't think I resist it. I think I'm a participant of it, but I find it malleable.
I just want to add something, which is that kept having meetings with people and reading things and going to conferences, and everyone uses the word queer, and then I would get into asking people to define it. No one could define it, and then it bothered me until I came up with a definition that now I'm ready to stand behind, sort of. And it's queerness is not an identity. Queerness is an orientation towards other people and other people's bodies and towards one's own body, in which we don't assume we know anything. Which I was thinking about when you were doing what you just offered us, in the sense that I think there's maybe an understanding of coming together as a lot about transparency and getting each other and understanding each other. Whereas for me, coming together with others, I'd be much more interested in a version in which the assumption actually is that we don't know anything about each other. And that anything we do know about each other is always subject to change.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.